Clara seemed like the perfect daughter-in-law, always poised and caring on the surface. But beneath her polished facade, a dangerous greed festered. When her 80-year-old mother-in-law, Evelyn, moved in with them, Clara saw her not as family, but as an obstacle standing between her and a life-changing inheritance. What began as subtle resentment spiraled into a cold, calculated plan to remove Evelyn from the picture entirely. Abandoned on a desolate road with no one in sight, Evelyn faced betrayal in its cruelest form. But what Clara didn't count on was Evelyn's resilience and the shocking turn of events that would unravel everything. A story of greed, justice, and unexpected redemption awaits, with twists no one saw coming. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting a soft glow across the spacious living room. Clara sat at the dining table, her hands clutching a steaming cup of coffee. On the outside, she was the picture of calm, but inside, her mind raced with thoughts of the inheritance she had waited for years to claim. Her husband, Paul, had gone to work early that day, leaving her alone with his aging mother, Evelyn, who had recently moved in with them after her health began to deteriorate. Evelyn had been nothing but kind to Clara over the years, but Clara's patience had worn thin. Caring for the frail 80-year-old woman had become a burden, especially now that the inheritance from Evelyn's late husband was finally within reach. The lawyer had called the previous week, confirming that the estate papers would soon be finalized. But there was one caveat. Evelyn intended to divide the inheritance equally between Clara and Paul. Clara, however, had other plans. The idea had crept into her mind late one night as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. If Evelyn were no longer in the picture, the inheritance would belong solely to her and Paul. Clara convinced herself that she wasn't doing anything wrong. She was merely taking what she deserved. And so, her plan began to take shape. That morning, Clara pretended to be her usual caring self, helping Evelyn into her coat and offering to take her on a drive to the countryside for some fresh air. Evelyn smiled warmly, unaware of the storm brewing beneath Clara's polished facade. As they drove along the quiet, winding roads, Evelyn chatted about her late husband, reminiscing about the life they had built together. Clara forced a smile, nodding at all the right moments, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The plan was simple: drive to a remote location, leave Evelyn there, and ensure that no one could trace her actions back to her. They reached a desolate stretch of road, bordered by overgrown fields, and lined with trees whose branches seemed to claw at the sky. Clara slowed the car and pulled over, pretending that something was wrong with the engine. "I'll just take a quick look under the hood," Clara said, stepping out of the car. Evelyn, ever trusting, stayed seated, her frail hands resting on her lap. After a moment, Clara opened the passenger door and feigned concern. "Evelyn," she said softly, "could you step out for a moment? I think the car's leaning to one side, and I don't want you to be uncomfortable while I check." Evelyn hesitated but complied, leaning on her cane as she stepped onto the uneven ground. Before she could say anything else, Clara reached into the car, grabbed Evelyn's small handbag, and tossed it onto the seat. "Clara, what's going on?" Evelyn asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. "I'm so sorry, Evelyn," she whispered, barely audible. Then, she climbed back into the car, slammed the door, and drove away without looking back. As the car disappeared down the road, Evelyn stood there, her frail figure dwarfed by the vast emptiness around her. She clutched her cane tightly, trying to process what had just happened. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain she had ever endured. Meanwhile, Clara drove back home, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She told herself that this was the only way, that Evelyn would be found by a kind stranger and taken care of, but a nagging guilt gnawed at her. When Paul returned home that evening, Clara feigned ignorance. She casually mentioned that Evelyn had gone out for a walk and hadn't returned yet. Paul, alarmed, called the police, but Clara played her part perfectly, expressing concern and blaming herself for not keeping a closer eye on Evelyn. Days passed with no sign of Evelyn. Clara began to relax, believing she had pulled off her plan without a hitch. But she didn't account for one thing: Evelyn's resilience. A farmer driving along the same desolate road had found Evelyn hours after Clara had abandoned her. Weak and disoriented, Evelyn had managed to tell him enough for him to take her to the nearest hospital. There, she was treated for exhaustion and dehydration. The police were called, and Evelyn recounted her story. Though she didn't want to believe it, she realized that Clara had intentionally left her behind. Evelyn stayed quiet at first, deciding to bide her time. She had always been a shrewd woman, and she knew that confronting Clara immediately might not yield the justice she sought. Instead, she began working with the police discreetly, gathering evidence to prove Clara's betrayal. Weeks later, Evelyn appeared at the front door of Clara and Paul's home, much to Clara's shock. Paul embraced his mother, overjoyed to see her alive and well. Clara, on the other hand, felt her heart drop. She forced a smile, masking her panic, as Evelyn calmly walked inside. "Clara," Evelyn said, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." What followed was a confrontation that left Clara speechless. Evelyn revealed that she knew exactly what had happened, detailing every moment of that fateful day. Clara tried to deny it, but Evelyn produced the police report and statements from witnesses, including the farmer who had rescued her. Paul, horrified by his wife's actions, demanded an explanation, but Clara could only stammer weak excuses. The trust between them shattered in an instant. Paul couldn't believe that the woman he had loved and trusted could be capable of such cruelty. The fallout was swift. Clara was arrested and charged with elder neglect and abandonment. The inheritance she had coveted so desperately was now completely out of reach. Evelyn, in a show of grace and strength, decided to use her wealth to establish a foundation supporting elder care and advocacy, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she had. As Clara sat alone in her prison cell, she replayed the events over and over, wondering how she had let her greed consume her so completely. Meanwhile, Evelyn's story became a source of inspiration for many, a testament to resilience and the power of justice. And though Evelyn had faced unimaginable betrayal, she found peace in the life she rebuilt, surrounded by love and the knowledge that she had turned her pain into purpose. She became a pillar of strength in her community, sharing her story to inspire others facing hardship. Evelyn opened her home to those in need, turning it into a sanctuary of kindness and compassion. Her days were filled with laughter, shared meals, and the warmth of newfound friendships. As she sat in her garden one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She had not just survived, but thrived, proving that even in the darkest moments, hope and love could lead to a brighter tomorrow.